Deep in the heart of the Pacific Northwest lies a trail shrouded in mystery. A trail that has seen the vanishing of countless hikers, leaving only whispers in the trees. A group of paranormal investigators set out to uncover the truth behind the disappearances, only to find themselves trapped in a forest that isn't what it seems. As the trees shift, paths disappear, and ghostly whispers beckon, they realize the forest is alive, and it's hungry. The line between reality and nightmare begins to blur, and their quest for answers quickly turns into a fight for survival. But the forest is always watching. What starts as an innocent hike in the Pacific Northwest turns into a nightmare no one is prepared for. The Cascade Trail, notorious for its strange disappearances, lures a group of paranormal investigators, Dax, Leah, Mike, and Aaron, into its depths, where dark secrets have remained buried for decades. As they venture into the dense, shadowed woods, the group seeks answers to the many unexplained vanishings. They are confident in their mission, ready to stream their findings live, but the forest has other plans. At first, everything seems normal, but soon, the very trees seem to shift and rearrange themselves, and a thick, suffocating atmosphere takes over. Whispers swirl around them, names are called from the depths of the woods, and a strange feeling of being watched begins to suffocate the group. The forest, however, is not just a passive witness to their fear. It's alive, a sentient entity that feeds on the terror of those who dare to wander its paths. As the group becomes more lost, they realize that not only is the forest shifting its own boundaries, but one of them is secretly working with the forest itself to trap the others. Tensions rise, and trust begins to crumble. Who can they turn to when the very land they stand on is their enemy? Will they survive the trial of the vanished, or will the forest claim them too, as it has so many others? Find out as the story unfolds, where the lines between horror, survival, and betrayal blur. Story number 1. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, a few days out of the city, just the 4 of them. Rachel Kim, Tyler, Jen, and Marcus. They had been planning it for months. A break from school, a way to shake off the stress of finals, relationships, and that endless cycle of work that felt like it would never end. The sun had started to dip below the horizon as they cruised down the highway, the road stretching endlessly before them. The GPS told them they'd make it to their destination by midnight if they stuck to the highway, but they'd been driving for hours and decided they wanted a more scenic route. Exit 13, Tyler said, pointing at the sign. It'll be cool. Let's take it. Rachel frowned, but didn't argue. Tyler was always the impulsive one, dragging everyone along with his spontaneous whims. Jen, who always followed Tyler's lead, was already on board. Marcus, however, grunted, clearly uncomfortable. This isn't exactly the best time for sightseeing, Marcus said, glancing at the darkening sky. The road looks deserted. Maybe we should just stick to the main highway. Rachel checked the time on her phone. We'll be fine. We'll just grab gas at the next station, stretch our legs, and then keep going. With a chorus of agreement, and some grumbling from Marcus, they veered off the highway onto the smaller, winding road marked by a lone sign reading, Exit 13. They drove for another 15 minutes, the trees growing thicker and more oppressive on either side, the kind of place that felt like it was holding its breath. The deeper they went into the woods, the more the world felt like it was closing in around them. And then they saw it. A small, run-down gas station sitting at the edge of the road, as if it had been forgotten by time. The neon lights flickered, on the pump, casting an eerie glow across the empty parking lot. The station looked abandoned, like something out of a nightmare, but it was their only option. Rachel pulled the car up to the pumps. We need gas. Let's just get this over with. Tyler and Jen were already jumping out of the car, laughing and heading toward the small, dilapidated convenience store. Marcus was slower, eyeing the station warily. "Something doesn't feel right about this place," he muttered under his breath. Rachel shrugged it off, locking the car doors. "Let's just get the gas and go." As they entered the convenience store, they were met by a strange sight. An old man behind the counter, his hair thin and greasy, his skin pale and blotchy. His eyes, however, were the most unsettling part. They were wide, unblinking, fixed on them like he could see through them. "Can I help you folks?" he asked, his voice raspy and quiet. "We're just filling up," Rachel said, trying to keep the mood light. "How's the night treating you?" The old man's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "You shouldn't be here. Not at this hour. Not at this exit. The road's dangerous." "Yeah, we've heard," Tyler said with a laugh. "But we're just passing through." The old man's eyes narrowed. "Don't take the scenic route. You'll regret it. Trust me." Rachel felt a chill slide down her spine, but she brushed it off. "We'll be fine. We're just headed to the next town over. Thanks anyway." But as they made their way back to the car, Rachel couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The air felt too still, too thick. The woods around them, the trees, everything seemed to be closing in. They got back in the car, and Rachel started the engine. "Okay, back on the road." The tires crunched on the gravel as they pulled away, but it didn't take long before something felt off. The landscape started to repeat itself. Rachel looked out the window, eyes narrowing in confusion. "Wait a minute. Didn't we just pass that tree?" Tyler turned, looking out the other window. "Yeah, I swear we've been down this road already." Rachel shook her head. "No way. This is just some weird optical illusion. We'll be fine." But it wasn't an illusion. They passed the same sign, the same curve in the road, the same bend in the trees. Rachel's grip tightened on the wheel. She slammed on the brakes. "Okay, what the hell is going on?" Marcus asked, his voice sharp. They all stared out the window, and sure enough, they were back at the gas station. "How did we—" Jen began. The gas station loomed in front of them, exactly as they had left it. Rachel was frozen, staring at the old man standing outside the door, watching them. "Let's just go back," Rachel muttered. "We'll figure this out." But when they turned around, they didn't end up back on the main road. Instead, they were back at the same spot. The same gas station, the same unblinking eyes. "We're stuck," Marcus said, his voice breaking. Rachel's heart started to race. She couldn't explain it. There was no logical reason why they kept looping back here. The world around them felt more and more surreal, like they were moving through some kind of bad dream. "I think we need to talk to him," Jen said, her voice trembling. "Maybe he knows what's happening." But when they went to the counter, the old man simply smiled again, a slow, knowing grin. "Didn't I warn you? It's too late now. You're already dead." The words hit them like a punch to the gut. Dead. That word echoed in Rachel's mind, and a sick realization twisted in her stomach. "Dead?" Tyler's voice cracked. "What do you mean we're dead?" The old man only shook his head. "Time doesn't work here the way you think it does. This place isn't a gas station. It's a stop on your way to wherever you're going. But you can't keep running from it. You've been dead since that night. That crash you don't remember? It wasn't just an accident." Rachel stared at him, her mind scrambling for some kind of logical explanation. She remembered the accident, the one she had never told anyone about. The car slipping off the road, the screeching metal. But she had woken up, alive, confused, and terrified in the hospital, surrounded by guilt. Was this her punishment? Why don't you just accept it? The old man said softly. Let go. Move on. Rachel's mind was a whirl of thoughts. She wanted to argue. She wanted to fight it. But Jen spoke, her voice gentle and understanding. Maybe he's right, Jen said. Maybe it's time. No, Marcus shouted. We're not dead. We can't be. But Rachel already knew. This place, the gas station, the loop, the repetition, was a liminal space. A space between life and death, caught in the cruel grip of time that refused to let them move on. Tyler was the first to disappear. 1 minute, he was there, laughing at something Jen had said, and the next, he was gone. His absence felt like a hole, an ache in the air. Then Jen, her face softening with acceptance, said goodbye. I'm ready, she whispered, and she, too, vanished, slipping into the endless loop of time that held them all captive. It was just Rachel and Marcus now. He was the last to break, to finally accept what had been clear all along. I can't do it, he said, tears streaming down his face. I can't accept it. Rachel didn't say anything. She simply nodded. For the first time, she felt peace, because she knew it was her choice now. She could move on, let go of the guilt, or she could stay forever, trapped in this nightmare. Rachel took a deep breath and, without a word, walked out of the station. The last thing she heard before she vanished was the soft, steady hum of the gas station's neon light. And then, nothing. Story number 2. Clara Holt had always traveled alone. There was something about the quiet isolation of it, the freedom, the ability to disappear into a place that nobody knew her. Maybe it was also because she was running from something that had happened months ago that she couldn't quite face, even though she tried. The memories of it clung to her like shadows, pulling at her as she traveled, never really letting her go. She arrived in Romania one cold evening, tired from her journey but excited to see something new. She had heard of a hostel in the mountains. No website, no phone number, just whispers from other travelers and a few scribbled notes in journals found at bus stops. It was supposed to be different, an off-the-beaten-path place where you could escape the crowds. People spoke of it like it was a secret. Some said it was magical, others called it eerie, but all the reviews were glowing, like the place was a hidden gem in a country full of ruins and forests. The bus dropped her off at a quiet, remote stop, a small road leading up into the misty hills. Clara followed the path, her boots crunching over the wet gravel as dusk fell. A few minutes later, she spotted the building, the hostel. It wasn't large, just a stone structure with a weathered sign hanging loosely in the breeze. It had an inviting look to it, though, as if it had been waiting for her. She was tired, and it was getting late. Inside, the warmth hit her immediately. The place smelled of wood and spice, and the sound of crackling fire filled the air. Behind the counter was a man, maybe in his late 20s, with messy brown hair and a crooked smile. His name was Luca. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth like velvet. "I've been expecting you." Clara hesitated, a chill running down her spine, but he didn't seem threatening, just friendly. She smiled back, a little unsure. "I'm Clara. I saw the reviews. Some people said you had an interesting place." Luca chuckled, handing her a key. "We do our best to make travelers feel at home. You'll be safe here." The hostel was cozy. The walls were lined with old books, mismatched furniture, and small knickknacks from far-off places. There were only a few other travelers staying that night. Aaron, a tech-savvy skeptic who was carrying a camera to document his trip, Mia, a quiet girl with a nervous energy who kept looking over her shoulder as if something was always watching, and a few others who stayed in the rooms on the floor above. The night passed uneventfully at first. They all shared a quiet dinner in the common room, laughing and chatting, but there was a subtle undercurrent of tension in the air, something Clara couldn't quite put her finger on. Afterward, they retreated to their rooms. It was the next morning when Clara first noticed something strange. Mia was missing. At breakfast, Luca seemed unfazed by the absence. "She must have left early," he said with a shrug, his smile as warm as ever. Not unusual for some guests. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling. It didn't sit right with her. The others seemed too calm about it, too accepting. The day passed slowly, and night crept in again. This time, Clara couldn't sleep. She kept hearing things, footsteps outside her door, muffled voices. When she opened her window, the world outside was bathed in fog. She closed it quickly, an unease settling in her stomach. At breakfast the next morning, Aaron was gone. "What the hell?" Clara muttered under her breath, looking around at the empty seats. "Where did they go?" Luca smiled again, his eyes almost gleaming with something Clara couldn't place. "Maybe they left early," he said with a shrug that didn't seem quite as convincing this time. The rest of the day felt strange. It was as though the walls of the hostel were pressing in, suffocating her. She wandered through the hallways trying to distract herself, but the place felt wrong, like it had somehow shifted overnight. There were things in the corners of her mind that didn't belong. Scratches on the walls, whispers behind closed doors, the sense of being followed even when she was alone. When night fell again, she couldn't sleep. The sound of shuffling feet echoed in the hall outside her door. Something was moving. She slipped out of bed, heart hammering, and crept toward the door. Through the crack, she saw a shadow move across the hallway. Clara's breath hitched. It was Mia. But it wasn't Mia. The figure in the hallway moved unnaturally, like it was mimicking her. Its posture was off, its movements jerky, as if it didn't quite know how to walk like a human. Clara stumbled back, her heart racing. She could feel her own pulse in her throat, the world spinning. She needed to get out of there. Panicked, she tried to run, but when she opened the door, Luca was standing there blocking her way. His smile was too wide, his eyes too bright. "You don't need to leave," he said softly. "The others are just resting. We're all part of the same cycle, Clara. You, me, everyone. We're all just memories here." She backed away, fear flooding her chest. What does that mean? What's happening? Luca's smile faded, but his eyes never left hers. The hostel feeds on memories. You are here because you've forgotten something. You, like everyone else who comes, are being replaced, piece by piece, until we are all just copies of you. Clara gasped, her legs nearly giving out beneath her. No, I'm not. I'm not one of them." He stepped closer, his voice barely a whisper. "But you are. You just don't know it yet." Suddenly, Clara saw it. On the wall behind Luca, there was a screen showing surveillance footage. The footage was grainy, but it was clear enough. It showed Mia, Aaron, and the others, their faces slowly changing, their features melting into something new, something that wasn't human, something that was mimicking them. Clara turned and ran. The hostel's walls seemed to stretch and shift, pulling her back in with every step. But she pushed forward, racing through the hallway, past the rooms until she reached the door. She burst through it, out into the cold night air, running as fast as she could, not daring to look back. But even as she ran, there was a thought gnawing at the back of her mind. something she couldn't ignore. The hostel had fed on her. It had already started to replace her. She was out, yes, but what if she hadn't escaped? What if the Clara Holt that had walked out of that place wasn't the real one after all? And somewhere, deep down, she wondered if she would ever know. Story number 3. It was supposed to be a simple road trip, a chance for Daniel Morris to reconnect with his family. After years on the road as a long-haul trucker, he thought a weekend away from work, from the grind, would do them good. His wife, Lisa, had agreed, and even Alex, their moody teenager, had begrudgingly joined in. It was meant to be a break, a few days of driving, laughing, and talking, but things didn't go as planned. The sun hung low in the sky as they cruised along a scenic highway, the kind of road that seemed to stretch forever, lined with thick woods and jagged cliffs. It was quiet, peaceful. They passed a few small towns, but nothing remarkable. Just another stretch of road, just another highway in the middle of nowhere. They were on their way to the coast, but Daniel had missed the exit. Lisa hadn't said anything at first, but Daniel knew she was a little annoyed. They had been on the road longer than planned. "It's all right," Lisa said, trying to make the best of it. "We'll just take the next turn." But that next turn never came. Instead, as they rounded a curve in the road, something strange appeared ahead. A sign, rusted, old, and standing alone at the edge of the highway. "Mile marker 0, Daniel muttered under his breath. He reached for the map, but there was no sign of such a marker on it. The road they were on wasn't even listed. "Mile marker 0? Lisa said, sounding puzzled. "That can't be right." "Yeah, that's odd," Daniel replied, but he didn't slow down. "Maybe it's an old marker. We'll find out soon enough." The rest of the drive was when things started to shift. The landscape around them seemed to change in subtle ways. It wasn't just the trees. They looked different, taller, twisted, like something out of a nightmare. The road itself felt wrong. The tires didn't roll the way they should have. The car swerved slightly with every turn, like the asphalt was alive and shifting beneath them. "I don't know about this," Alex muttered from the back seat, his voice breaking the uneasy silence. "Where are we? This doesn't look like any highway I've seen." "I don't know either," Daniel said, his grip tightening on the wheel. "But we'll keep going. We'll be fine." That was when the first odd thing happened. They passed through a town that wasn't on any map. It wasn't a ghost town exactly, but something about it felt off. The buildings were old, dilapidated, but they didn't look abandoned. It was like time had forgotten it, like it wasn't meant to exist anymore. "Did we miss a turn?" Lisa asked, looking out the window. Daniel slowed the car and glanced at the road signs. "No, we're on the right path, but this place isn't on the map." They drove through, but as they did, Daniel could have sworn he saw people in the windows of the buildings, watching them with unblinking eyes. "Keep driving," Lisa said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't like this." They didn't stop. They just kept driving, hoping the town would be the only weird thing they encountered. But they couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something wrong lingering at the edges of their vision. Hours passed. Days seemed to bleed into each other. Every time Daniel checked the clock, it was later than it should have been. Time was slipping through his fingers, and the radio began to pick up strange static, then whispers, soft, barely audible voices that he couldn't make out. He fiddled with the dial, trying to get it to stop, but it only got worse. "Dad, I don't like this," Alex said, his voice tense. "Something's not right. This place isn't real." "You're just tired," Daniel said, trying to sound reassuring. But even he wasn't convinced. Something in the air felt thick, oppressive, like the world was holding its breath. That's when Jamie, their youngest, spoke up. "Do you hear it?" Jamie's voice was soft, his eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity. "Hear what, Jamie?" Lisa asked, glancing back at him. "The road," Jamie whispered, staring out the window. "It talks. It wants us to stay. It doesn't want us to leave." Daniel glanced at Lisa. They both exchanged uneasy looks. "You're just imagining things," Daniel said, but his words came out unconvincing. His son had always been perceptive, especially with his strange little gifts. But this was different. The road wasn't just some place they were driving through, it was pulling at them, sucking them in. The whispers grew louder that night. They couldn't sleep. The car seemed to roll on its own, moving with a force that wasn't human. Daniel checked the map again. There was nothing. No town, no landmarks, just empty space. The road stretched endlessly, the white lines on the asphalt blurring together like the edge of a bad dream. "Mile marker 0, Daniel said again, his voice tight. "Dad," Alex whispered from the back seat. "Something's wrong. I can't—" His voice broke off. "I don't know where we are." The road was changing again, stretching farther, the trees looking like they were closing in, pushing them forward. It was suffocating. The car felt like a coffin. "Dad," Jamie whispered, his voice shaking. "The road, it wants us." At that moment, the car jerked to a halt. The headlights flickered out, leaving them in complete darkness. They sat there in the quiet, the hum of the engine gone. Then Jamie spoke again, his voice barely a whisper. "It's here." The others looked at him in confusion, but when they turned to look ahead, they saw it. Figures creeping out from the shadows, dressed in old, tattered robes, their faces hidden behind masks. They didn't move like people. They moved like something else, something that was not quite human. "They're the ones who made the road," Jamie said, his eyes wide with terror. "They made it to trap us. They want our souls." The figures surrounded them, their eyes glowing faintly beneath the masks. And then they spoke. Not with their mouths, but in Daniel's mind. "You will stay. You will never leave." Jamie's voice broke through the silence, more forceful now. "No, you won't take them." He reached for the door, pulling it open against the force holding them all in place. Daniel and Lisa screamed for him to stop, but it was too late. With a cry, Jamie threw himself out of the car, running toward the figures. The road twisted violently as they watched, and Jamie fell to his knees, his small body writhing as the figures surrounded him. A terrible scream tore through the night, then silence. When they looked again, Jamie was gone. The road, the figures, everything was still. The whispers stopped. The air felt lighter. For the first time in what felt like forever, the car seemed to move, rolling forward under its own power. Daniel and Lisa, numb with grief and horror, could only watch as the road stretched on. It felt endless, like it had no beginning and no end. And the worst part? Even though they were free to leave, they knew the road would always be there, waiting, pulling them back. Story number 4. Leo Vargas had never been one to believe in anything beyond the practical. He was a man of science, logic, reason. But standing on the dock in Venice, his mind felt foggy, just a little out of place. Maybe it was the trip itself. He and Ava had come to Italy for a vacation, a fresh start. For Leo, it was meant to be a break from everything, a chance to forget the weight of the past that had clung to him for as long as he could remember. Ava squeezed his hand, a smile on her face. "This is going to be fun. Just a late-night ferry ride. We've been walking all day. Let's see Venice from the water." Leo nodded, trying to shake the unease that had settled in his stomach since the moment they'd stepped foot on the docks. There was something strange about the night. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, and the air felt unnaturally still. They had wandered through the narrow, dimly lit streets, and somehow they'd ended up here at the water's edge. There was a small ferry waiting, empty except for a lone man standing by the boat, his back to them. "Are you the guide?" Ava asked, her voice light, almost playful. The man turned slowly, a crooked smile spreading across his face. He was tall and thin, dressed in a long coat that looked as old as the city itself. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, but there was a strange familiarity about him, like they had met before, though Leo couldn't say where. "Yes," the man said, his voice low, yet smooth, like the sound of distant thunder. "I am Ferryman Salvi. You'll be riding with me tonight." Leo didn't know why, but the name sounded wrong. Too familiar, too far away. He glanced at Ava, but she didn't seem bothered by it. She was already stepping onto the boat, pulling Leo along with her. "This is the scenic route," Salvi said, as he untied the boat and pushed off from the dock. "The best way to see Venice by night. But once we begin, there's no turning back." Leo chuckled nervously. "No turning back?" Salvi only smiled, a strange, knowing smile, and nodded. The boat cut through the still water, moving silently in the dark. The city of Venice seemed to disappear behind them as the boat drifted into the fog. The air grew colder. The mist rolled, in thick, swallowing everything around them, and the sound of the water against the boat became muffled, distant. Leo looked around, but all he could see were shadows in the fog. The others on the boat were silent now. Ava, who had been talking non-stop just minutes before, now seemed lost in thought. Leo looked at Paolo, a local guide who had joined them on the ferry, but the man's eyes were closed, his face pale. There was an old woman sitting at the far end of the boat, her hands clasped in her lap. She hadn't spoken since they boarded. Leo tried to shake the feeling that something was wrong. His memory felt slippery, like he was forgetting something important. The names of the streets they had walked earlier, the places they had visited, they all seemed distant, blurred. He couldn't quite grasp them, couldn't remember the details. "Ava," he said, turning to her, "where did we stay tonight?" She looked at him with confusion. "What do you mean? Our hotel? We're staying at—" But her voice trailed off, and for a moment, Leo couldn't remember the name of the hotel either. It felt like it had never existed. He blinked, trying to focus, but the words slipped away. "What's wrong?" Ava asked, a trace of panic in her voice. "Leo, you're scaring me." The old woman suddenly stood up, her movements jerky and stiff. She whispered something under her breath, a language Leo didn't recognize. He felt a cold chill creep down his spine. The fog thickened, and the world beyond the boat became a void. Leo could no longer see the distant lights of Venice. There was only the sound of the water and the faint, eerie hum of the boat's engine. "We're trapped," Leo whispered, his voice cracking. "Ava, something's wrong. We shouldn't have gotten on this boat." "I know," she whispered back. Her face was pale now, her eyes wide. "I can't remember anything. Where are we?" "Leo." Salvi's voice came from the darkness, smooth and cold. "Do you know why you're here?" Leo turned toward him, his heart hammering. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. He couldn't remember why he was there. He couldn't remember who he was. Salvi's eyes glittered in the dark. "You're like the others, Leo. Just like the others who take this ferry. You died, you know. long ago. You were never meant to board this boat." Leo's breath caught in his throat. "What do you mean I died?" "The ferry," Salvi continued, his smile widening. "It takes souls who don't know they're dead, those who slip through the cracks, who forget who they are, and you, my friend, forgot. All of you forgot. That's why you're here." Ava gasped beside him. "No, we're alive. We have to be." "No," Leo said, shaking his head. "We're not. We can't be." His mind raced, trying to grasp what Salvi had said. He thought back, trying to find the pieces. But the harder he tried to remember, the more they slipped away. The names, the faces, his past. It was all fading, like smoke in the wind. "Who am I?" Leo whispered, feeling his heart stop. Salvi's smile twisted. "You were never meant to know." The fog seemed to close in around them, suffocating, pressing in on them from all sides. Leo looked at the faces of the others. Ava, Paolo, the old woman. They all looked lost, confused, like they were fading from existence. "Why can't we remember?" Leo asked, his voice breaking. "Why are we forgetting?" "Because," Salvi said, his voice dripping with something dark and cruel, "your names are already gone. You're already forgotten. And now, you'll never leave." The boat rocked gently, as if in agreement. It didn't matter how much they struggled. They were already dead, already forgotten. The ferry was their prison. The fog was their tomb. Leo's vision blurred, the world around him twisting. He saw flashes, snippets of other lives, other faces, other memories. He was someone else, someone he couldn't quite name, someone who had lived and died 100 times before. He was lost in the endless cycle. But then, something shifted inside him. A decision, a choice. He couldn't stay. He couldn't be trapped in this place. Without thinking, Leo jumped. The cold water wrapped around him like 1,000 hands, pulling him deeper into the darkness. The fog swallowed him whole. For a moment, there was nothing. No sound, no thought, no memory. Just the weight of oblivion. And then, it was over. Story number 5. Maya Singh had seen plenty of strange places in her years of chasing urban legends, but nothing like Rest Stop Detour 27. She was used to weird, eerie things. Cursed towns, haunted houses, long-forgotten hotels. But this place, tucked just off a lonely stretch of highway, was something else entirely. The first sign that something was wrong hit them when they pulled in. It was clean. Too clean. There wasn't a single crumb or stain on the picnic tables, no litter on the pavement, no bugs buzzing around. It looked like a postcard, the kind of place you'd see on a brochure about scenic roadside stops, but it was more than that. It felt empty, like it didn't belong. "All right, we've been on the road for hours. I'm pulling over for a break," Dean said, his voice sounding tired, like he was fighting off a headache. He slammed the brakes and the van rolled to a stop under the shade of a large oak tree. Maya, her camera in hand, immediately began recording. She'd heard rumors about Rest Stop Detour 27, strange disappearances, unexplained events. This was the perfect place to capture something. "This place looks like it's straight out of a horror movie," Caleb said, peering through the camera lens, his voice muffled by the equipment. "But it's weird, right? It's too clean, like it's been waiting for us." Maya nodded, her stomach doing a little flip. "Perfect. This could be something big." Lila, Maya's younger sister, leaned out the side door and stretched. "I'm starving. Let's see what they've got in the vending machines." Dean shook his head. "Don't eat anything from here, Lila. You don't know what's been stocked. Something about this place just feels wrong." But Lila shrugged him off and wandered towards the vending machines. Maya kept her eyes on the surroundings, the uneasy feeling crawling up her spine. The rest stop felt too still. No one was around. It should have been filled with people, or at least some truck drivers taking a break, but there was no one. "I'll take a look around," Maya said, trying to shake the feeling of unease. She raised her camera to her eye and began walking across the pavement, recording every angle. She didn't know why, but it felt like she had to document everything. Her gut told her that this place wasn't just another abandoned stop. It was something else entirely. It didn't take long for the rest of the group to start feeling the same tension. Lila came back from the machines holding a bag of chips and a soda. But there was something different about her. She looked distant, like she wasn't really there. "I'm just gonna sit down for a second," Lila said quietly, sitting on a bench with her back straight, her eyes fixed forward. Dean joined Maya near the van. "This is getting weird, Maya. I've been doing long-haul driving for years, and I've never seen a rest stop this clean, this empty. It's almost like it's set up for us to come in." Maya's skin prickled, but she didn't say anything. She just turned the camera towards Lila. "She's acting strange, isn't she?" Dean nodded. "Yeah, and I don't like it. But we'll stay a bit longer. I mean, what's the harm?" Caleb, still fiddling with his camera, glanced up and squinted at the horizon. "Guys, this is definitely off. This place, I don't think it's supposed to be here. I swear the road back there wasn't like this. We've been driving for hours and the road's not right. It doesn't match." Maya's heart skipped. She glanced at Caleb, then at Dean, who looked back at her with a furrowed brow. She didn't want to say it aloud, but the words were stuck in her throat. She had a sinking feeling that this wasn't just an odd rest stop. Something darker was at play, something wrong. As they all stood in uneasy silence, Lila suddenly stood up. She moved quickly, faster than anyone could react, and before anyone could stop her, she vanished into the trees. It was like she'd been pulled into the shadows, swallowed, up by the air itself. "Lila!" Maya called out, her heart thudding in her chest. "Lila, where are you?" She ran toward the trees, but there was no sign of her sister. The rest stop, once empty and still, now felt like a pressure cooker, and Maya could feel the heat in her face as panic began to rise. "Where did she go?" Caleb asked, his voice tight with fear. "She just disappeared." Dean cursed under, his breath reaching for the van keys. "We need to get out of here, now." But Maya couldn't move. She couldn't just leave. The nagging feeling in the pit of her stomach told her that something in this place was pulling her in, and she couldn't ignore it. She had to understand what was happening. "Wait," she said, grabbing Dean's arm before he could start the van. "We can't leave yet. Something's wrong, and I need to find out what it is." Dean shook his head. "Maya, we need to go. It's not safe here." But Maya wasn't listening. She stepped away from him, her feet moving before her mind could catch up. Something was drawing her towards the rest stop's main building. She had to get inside. She had to look closer. And that's when she saw it. A shadow, just a flicker in the corner of her vision, moved behind the building. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a thing. It was a void, a space that sucked in the light around it. Then she saw it again. Lila, standing at the edge of the shadow. She was staring straight at Maya, but her eyes were empty, silent. And then Lila's lips moved, but no sound came out. Before Maya could even breathe, the shadow rippled. The air around her twisted, and she was suddenly facing the building once, again. Only it was different. The air felt heavier now, charged with something unnatural. Caleb, Dean, and the old man who had been sitting on a bench earlier, all of them were silent now, staring at Maya. Their faces were blank, their mouths shut, eyes wide with terror. It wasn't them anymore. And then it hit her. She wasn't the first one to come here. The rest stop had been waiting for them, just like it had waited for others. It fed on people, luring them in with its clean surfaces and false comfort. Once, you stayed too long. It trapped you. You became another piece of the thing that had no true form. Maya didn't think. She just acted. Grabbing a nearby fire extinguisher, she swung it against the building, smashing it into the wall. The wall cracked open, releasing a sound that was almost like a scream. The entire rest stop shuddered, and for a brief moment, she thought it was over. But the ground beneath her feet rumbled. Maya turned, breathing heavily. Behind her, the rest stop reappeared, still whole, still perfect, a mile down the road. The feeding never stopped, and as she stood there, watching the perfect illusion form again in the distance, she knew it would always be there, waiting for the next group of travelers to arrive. Story number 6. Eliza Monroe had always hated flying. It wasn't the height or the turbulence that got to her. It was the sense of being trapped, stuck in a metal tube, 30,000 feet in the air with no control, no escape. She always felt like the ground was miles away, like it was just a memory, something she'd never be able to reach again. But it was something she had learned to live with, or at least to tolerate. That's why, when she boarded Flight 547 from London to New York, she felt that familiar knot in her stomach. Her palms were clammy as she found her seat, 32C, near the back of the plane. The hum of the engines, the murmur of the other passengers. It all felt like a lullaby, a reminder that she was far from home. "Can I get you something to drink?" Flight attendant Greg's voice interrupted her thoughts. He was tall, his uniform crisp, his face friendly. He was one of those flight attendants who had been doing it so long he knew exactly what you needed before you did. Eliza smiled weakly. "I'll have a water, please," she said. Greg nodded and disappeared down the aisle. Eliza settled in, trying to calm her breathing, focusing on the in-flight entertainment screen in front of her. The plane took off, its engines roaring as they ascended into the clouds. Her stomach churned, but she tried to ignore it. She had done this before, but as the hours ticked by, something felt off. It wasn't the usual discomfort. It wasn't just her nerves. She glanced around, noticing the other passengers. No one was talking, not like they usually did. The plane felt unusually quiet, almost too quiet. The lights flickered a couple of times, but that was nothing unusual for a flight. Maybe it was just the bad weather. That's when she noticed the child. He was sitting alone in seat 23B, a boy about 8 or 9 with messy brown hair and a backpack that looked a little too big for him. He was staring straight ahead, his eyes wide, unblinking. His expression was vacant, as if he were somewhere far, far away. Eliza frowned. She couldn't remember seeing him bored, but there he was. She looked around again, trying to find anyone who might be with him. His parents. The woman sitting next to him seemed absorbed in her magazine, unaware of the child's presence. Greg passed by again, this time with a tray of snacks. Eliza caught his eye. "Is that kid okay?" she asked, her voice low. Greg's face didn't change. "Oh, you mean 23B? He's been quiet the whole flight, but he's fine. Nothing to worry about." Eliza nodded, but something about Greg's tone bothered her. It was too flat, too rehearsed. 6 hours later, the plane landed in New York. But something was wrong. As the seatbelt sign dinged off and passengers started to gather their belongings, Eliza noticed the strange silence. It wasn't the usual buzz of excitement or the chatter of people ready to stretch their legs after a long flight. There was nothing. No one spoke. It was like the world outside had ceased to exist. She tried to stand, but the ground felt strange, like it wasn't solid beneath her. She shook her head, trying to clear the fog that had settled in her mind. She had no memory of the last 6 hours. Had she been asleep? Was there some turbulence she hadn't noticed? "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated." The voice of the pilot came over the intercom, but it sounded wrong, distant, like it was coming from underwater. "We seem to have had a slight delay. Please stay in your seats." Eliza blinked. Delay? They had just landed. She glanced at the window, expecting to see the skyline of New York, but instead, the view was off. The skyline was blurred, like a smeared painting. She turned to look at the other passengers. No one seemed alarmed. No one seemed to notice. Everyone was still, motionless, like mannequins frozen in time. That was when the first scream pierced the air. Dean, the man in seat 12A, had collapsed. He was twitching on the floor, his face contorted, in agony. The emergency lights flickered on, casting a strange red hue over the cabin. Flight attendant Greg rushed to his side, but by the time he knelt down, Dean was already gone. His body was nothing but a lifeless husk. The rest of the passengers didn't even flinch. Eliza's blood ran cold. This was not a normal flight. It was something worse, something impossible. Then another scream. It came from the back of the plane, from seat 23B. The child, the boy, was standing in the aisle now, his eyes wide, his mouth hanging open as if he were trying to scream, but nothing came out. His body contorted in strange, unnatural ways. His limbs bent at impossible angles, and then, just like that, his body collapsed in on itself. There was a wet, sickening crack as his bones shattered, but the child wasn't dead. Not really. He slowly began to rise again. Eliza's heart raced. What the hell was happening? She stumbled back, her mind spinning. This wasn't a plane. This wasn't real. This wasn't New York. This wasn't anything. Hours passed, but the plane never moved. The passengers, those still alive, were now slumped over, silent. Flight attendant Greg had long since vanished. So had the pilot. Only Eliza and a few others remained, all trapped in this strange in-between place. No one spoke. No one moved. And then Eliza saw it. The entity. It was a shadow at first, flickering in the corners of her vision, but then it began to take shape. It was fluid, shifting from one form to another, its edges not quite defined. It was the child's shape, the shape of flight attendant Greg, the form of a woman she'd never seen before. It was everything and nothing, all at once. It was the thing that had been on this plane all along, and it was feeding on them, feeding on their fear, their confusion. Eliza stumbled backward, her hand clutching her throat. It was pulling her in, dragging her toward it. And then the truth hit her. She hadn't been on the flight, she hadn't even boarded. But here she was, here in this place, this twisted reflection of reality. It was a purgatory, a realm between life and death. Her eyes blurred, and the shadows around her grew darker. She had to do something. She couldn't stay here, but as she looked around, she knew there was nothing she could do to escape. The black box. She had to find the black box. With trembling hands, she made her way to the cockpit. It was empty, the instruments flickering in the dim red light. She found the black box buried beneath a pile of discarded papers. Her heart pounded as she pulled it free, pressing the button to replay the final recording. The voice came through the speakers, soft, distorted. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've entered the zone. Please stay calm. The others are not coming back. We died mid-air. This is purgatory." The voice faltered, static crackling through. "Eliza, we're all already gone." And with that, the recording ended. The plane, the passengers, the strange child, they were all dead. They had been dead for hours. And now, Eliza was trapped in this limbo with them, in this twisted reflection of reality. She closed her eyes, and then the world went dark. Story number 7. Noelle Wren had been walking for hours when she spotted the inn. The road was endless, the dark sky above swallowing everything in sight, and her legs ached from the constant motion. She didn't plan on stopping, but the faint glow from the roadside sign, Crossroads Inn, seemed like a beacon in the distance. She had no destination, just the road stretching out before her, but the cold night air was wearing her down. With a sigh, Noelle made her way toward the inn. She didn't expect much. A bed, maybe some food, and the chance to catch her breath before hitting the road again. She didn't want to stay in one place for too long. The past had a way of catching up with her when she did. The inn was old, faded, red brick and weathered wood, the kind of place you'd expect to find off some forgotten highway. The door creaked open as she pushed it, revealing the dim interior. The air smelled musty, like old wood and forgotten memories. Behind the counter stood an older man with gray hair and a face like stone, his eyes almost too calm for someone who ran an inn in the middle of nowhere. He didn't smile, just gave a small nod when she stepped inside. "You're here for a room?" he asked, his voice steady, almost too steady. Noelle hesitated for a moment. "Yeah, just for the night." "Room 7, he said, sliding a key across the counter. "It's ready for you. Breakfast will be served in the morning. Don't be late." Noelle didn't ask any questions. She just took the key and headed up the narrow stairs. Her feet creaked on the old wood, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. She glanced back once, but the innkeeper was still standing there, unmoving. The room was small, a bed with a faded quilt, a wooden dresser, and a single window looking out onto the dark road. It was cozy, in a way, but there was something off about it, something she couldn't put her finger on. She tossed her bag onto the bed and went to wash up in the bathroom. The mirror above the sink seemed to stretch too long, the edges warping in a way that made her stomach turn. When she finished, she lay down, pulling the quilt up around her shoulders. The silence in the room pressed against her ears, like the world outside had stopped moving altogether. And then, the sound of the clock on the wall began to tick louder. She stared at it for a moment, her eyes heavy, before the world around her started to blur. Noelle awoke to a knock on the door. She groggily glanced at the clock. Only a few minutes had passed since she'd fallen asleep. How could it be morning already? She opened the door, rubbing her eyes, and came face to face with a man dressed in dusty, worn clothes, his face rough with the grit of someone who'd lived a hard life. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, and he was holding a saddlebag in his hand. "I'm sorry to disturb you, miss," he said with a slight accent. "I was wondering if you might have seen my horse. It's gone missing." Noelle blinked at him, confused. "Horse? I'm sorry, I haven't seen anyone around here." The man nodded, stepping back. "Maybe I'm mistaken. I'll try the others." Before she could say anything else, he turned and walked down the tea hall. She watched him go, but there was something in the way he moved. Slow, deliberate, that made her feel unsettled. She closed the door and rubbed her eyes again, trying to shake the strange feeling that had settled over her. As she walked back to the bed, the door opened again. This time, a woman stood there. A woman in sleek black clothes, her eyes glowing from behind neon-tinted glasses. She gave Noelle a smirk, her posture confident. "I hope I'm not interrupting," the woman said. "I just wanted to make sure the systems here are all up to date. You know, for the security." Noelle frowned. "Systems?" The woman didn't wait for an answer. She stepped into the room, pulling out a small device that looked like a miniature computer, her fingers tapping at the keys with rapid precision. "I'm Mira," she said without looking up from her device. "Just making sure everything's secure. You never know when something might... Oh, there it is." She turned the screen around, showing a map of the inn and its surroundings. Noelle stared at it for a moment, but something didn't make sense. There were coordinates on the screen, but they didn't match any place Noelle had ever seen. And when Mira smiled, it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the kind of grin that made Noelle's skin crawl. "Anyway," Mira said, standing up and walking toward the door, "don't mind me. Just remember, stay safe here. There's no telling what's out there." She left without another word, the door closing softly behind her. Later that evening, Noelle decided to head downstairs for dinner, hoping to shake off the weirdness that had started to settle over her. When she entered the dining area, she froze. The cowboy, the man from earlier, was sitting at a table eating his meal as though nothing had happened. He looked up as Noelle approached and nodded. "Did you find your horse?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. The man frowned, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What horse?" Noelle blinked, taken aback. You asked me about a horse earlier." "I didn't ask you about any horse," he said slowly, looking her over as though she were crazy. "I've been here the whole time, just sitting, eating." Noelle's stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. She glanced around the room, but the other people seated there, an older man with a weathered face, a woman in an old-fashioned dress, a man in a monk's habit, were all watching her with strange, knowing eyes. They didn't speak, just stared. The air in the room felt thick. Time itself seemed to be moving differently, like it had lost all its regularity. Noelle's heart raced as she realized that the people in the room, these strangers, were somehow familiar, as though she had seen them before. That was when she heard the innkeeper's voice again, cutting through the silence like a knife. "You're not the first to stay here, Noelle," Virgil said, appearing in the doorway, his face impassive. "And you won't be the last. This place, it's where timelines intersect, where realities meet." Noelle's mind spun. She opened her mouth to speak, but Virgil raised a hand, silencing her. "You're a version of yourself from another place, another time. And so are they," he said, nodding toward the others in the room. "You've crossed paths with yourself, and you'll all have to make a choice." "What do you mean?" Noelle whispered. "Here, time bends," Virgil continued. "You've all arrived from different realities, different versions of your life. You're all fragments, and in this place you can merge, or you can stay and lose yourself piece by piece." Noelle felt the weight of his words press against her chest. The cowboy, the hacker, the monk, they weren't strangers. They were her, in different lives, different versions of herself. She looked around at the people who were all versions of her, and she knew, deep down, that there was only one choice left. Without saying another word, Noelle stepped forward. Her body shuddered, her mind expanding as the others closed in around her, their forms shifting and blending with her own. In an instant, all of her selves merged, becoming something new, something no longer human. She was everything and nothing. And the Crossroads Inn waited for the next traveler to arrive. Story number 8. Mark Tiller had never liked the long drives. Too much time to think. Too many memories that clung to him like old, crumbling wallpaper. He shifted in the passenger seat of their car, staring out at the winding road. The mountains loomed like silent sentinels on either side, jagged peaks poking out of the haze. It was late afternoon, the sky streaked with pink and gold, the kind of sunset that made you feel like you were leaving something behind. And maybe they were. Karen, his wife, glanced over at him. She smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Mark knew too well. She'd been patient with him after everything, but Mark could see it, the gap between them, the distance that had grown since their son, Ben, had died. "We'll be there soon," Karen said, her voice gentle, but Mark could hear the edge of exhaustion in it. "I know," Mark muttered. I think I'll feel better once we're out of the car." They were taking a shortcut through the mountain pass to get to a friend's cabin. Karen had found the route on a map, said it would be quicker. Mark didn't argue. Anything to get to some kind of peace. The road was narrow, barely wide enough for the car to fit. As they climbed higher into the mountains, the trees became thicker and the shadows grew longer. Mark's eyes felt heavy, his mind wandering to the dark corners he didn't want to visit. He hadn't slept much the night before, but sleep never helped anyway. When he closed his eyes, he still saw Ben's face, heard his laugh, felt the cold grip of that moment. "Mark, look out." Karen's voice snapped him back to reality. He slammed on the brakes. The car lurched, tires screeching on the gravel, but it was too late. He had hit something. Someone. A small figure lay in the road, crumpled like a rag doll. "Oh, God," Mark gasped, his heart racing as he jumped out of the car. "What the hell? What did we hit?" Karen was already at the front of the car, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror. "A child! A child!" she gasped. "Mark, there's no—" But when Mark reached the spot, there was nothing there. The road was empty. No child, no body. Just the fading dust of their tires. Karen's voice trembled. "Where did they go? I swear I saw a child. A little girl." Mark looked around, his stomach sinking. The light was fading fast and the road stretched out like a tunnel in the growing darkness. No one was around. There wasn't even a house nearby. No signs of any life. Just trees and rocks and the empty stretch of road that felt like it was watching them. "I don't know, Karen. I don't know what happened," Mark said, his voice shaking. Karen was trembling, clutching onto him. "We need to leave. We need to get out of here, Mark." He nodded, feeling the weight of her fear pressing down on him. They had to get away from whatever that was. Whatever had just happened. The road felt wrong now, the air thick, pressing, against his chest. He quickly helped her back into the car, and they pulled away, the tires kicking up gravel as they sped off. But the rest of the night was far from over. That night, at the cabin, things didn't get better. The house was quiet. Too quiet. The air inside felt heavy with something they couldn't name. Mark tried to shake off the strange feeling, but it clung to him, wrapping around his thoughts like a dark cloud. Karen went to bed early, but Mark stayed up, staring out the window. The trees outside swayed in the wind, but it was the silence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The silence wasn't right. It felt wrong, like something was waiting. At first, he thought it was his imagination. But then, he saw them, children, figures in white, little ghosts moving across the yard, their faces pale, eyes dark and hollow. Their hands were outstretched, reaching for him as if they were begging. Mark froze. He thought he was seeing things that maybe he had finally cracked. But then one of them, a little boy with a dirty face, stepped closer to the window. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The boy's mouth moved, but no sound came out. And then the child's face twisted in pain, in anger, before vanishing into the night. Mark jumped back from the window, heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't breathe. This wasn't happening. This wasn't real. But when he looked at Karen, she was still asleep, undisturbed. The children outside were gone. The night was quiet again. But Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching, waiting. The next morning, Mark tried to convince himself it was just the stress. Maybe it was the mountain air, or maybe it was his guilt. He'd been carrying that weight around for so long. But deep down, he knew the truth. The children were real. They weren't just in his head. As they packed up to leave, Mark couldn't help but glance at the road, the place where the child had vanished. The memory of hitting something, of seeing nothing in the spot where he thought a life had ended, gnawed at him. "Mark, let's just go," Karen said, her voice shaking. "Please, let's go home." He nodded, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being drawn back to that road, like something was calling them to return. They left the cabin and took the road back, the same twisting, narrow path they had driven before. The mountains seemed to close in around them. But as they drove, the figures returned. Children standing in the middle of the road, their faces twisted in pain. Some were smiling, but it was a cruel smile. Others were crying. All of them were looking at Mark, as if they were waiting for him. "Karen, I can't do this," Mark gasped. I can't keep driving. Suddenly, a crash, sharp and brutal. Mark slammed his foot on the brakes, but it was too late. The car swerved violently, tires screeching. He barely had time to react before the world exploded. In a blur of metal and glass, Mark woke up in darkness. His head throbbed, his body ached. When he opened his eyes, he saw the mountain pass again, the road stretching before him. But there was something wrong with the world now. The air was thick and the shadows were longer. The children were there standing silently in the road. They had never left. And then he realized the truth. He wasn't supposed to survive. He never had. They had lured him here. The ghosts of the children, the ones who had died on this road before him, had been waiting for him to join them, to take his place. And in that moment, Mark understood. The cycle was endless. He was a part of it now, and there would be no escaping. Just like the children, he would remain here, forever lost in the road's grip. The car, the accident, it was all part of the plan. He and Karen had never truly escaped. The crash had been their final moment, and now they would live it over and over again. Story number 9. Nina Bell had always been a free spirit. She wasn't one for rules, plans, or the predictable. When her father passed away, it left a hole in her, one that had her searching for meaning in every corner of the world. After months of quiet grieving, she found something. A vintage camper van. Old, faded, but with a certain charm that called to her. It was perfect. A place to escape, to start fresh, to honor her father's memory by living the way he always wanted her to. It didn't matter that Jordan, her boyfriend, was skeptical. He wasn't the kind of guy who enjoyed long road trips or spontaneous adventures. He liked comfort, predictability. But Nina knew he'd come around. The van was the answer to the freedom she'd been craving, the escape from everything that tied her down. "Isn't it a bit too much?" Jordan asked as they stood in front of the van, its paint peeling and the windows clouded with years of dust. The seller had called it a vintage gem, but it looked more like a relic from a past that hadn't been kind. "No," Nina smiled, brushing the dust off the side. "It's perfect. This is what we need, Jordan. A fresh start." He hesitated, but finally agreed, more to keep her happy than anything else. And so, the deal was made. The first few days on the road were as dreamy as Nina had hoped. The van's engine purred as they cruised down the highway, the wind in their hair, the world open before them. At night, they'd park in quiet, peaceful spots where the stars stretched across the sky like a blanket of endless possibilities. It was everything Nina had imagined. But soon, things started to change. It began with the radio. It wasn't the static that got to them, but the whispering. At first, Nina thought it was just the usual interference. Maybe a distant station cutting in or something odd with the van's old wiring. But when it happened again, voices, soft, low, murmuring just beyond comprehension, she couldn't ignore it anymore. "Did you hear that?" Nina asked one night as they were driving through the empty desert roads, the van's headlights cutting through the darkness. Jordan frowned, turning the radio dial. "Probably just some weird station. It's nothing, Nina." But Nina couldn't shake the feeling that the voices were speaking to her, asking her something. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was inviting. The whispers were comforting, like a lullaby she couldn't forget. As the days passed, the voices grew louder. The static in the van's radio was constant, sometimes even when it was turned off. And it wasn't just the radio now. It was the van itself. Nina could feel it, the way it seemed to respond to her, as though it had a mind of its own. She told Jordan about it, but he was always quick to dismiss her fears. "It's just the van, Nina. Old stuff makes noises," he would say. "You're overthinking it." But Nina wasn't so sure. She started having dreams. Strange, vivid dreams where she was trapped inside the van, driving endlessly. The road would twist, stretch, and then the van would stop, always at the edge of a cliff, where shadows reached out to her like hands. In those dreams, she would wake up, but something about it didn't feel right. The air felt heavy, thick, and the whispers were louder. She could almost feel the van itself breathing, its engine purring with a life of its own. One night, as they were parked at a small campground, they met Alice, a lone traveler with a distant look in her eyes. She seemed to have been on the road for far too long, her clothes worn and faded, her face shadowed with exhaustion. "Where are you guys headed?" Alice asked, her voice strange as though she was speaking from far away. "Just heading west," Nina replied, smiling. "We're taking the scenic route." Alice's eyes flickered to the van behind them, and she shuddered, an involuntary tremor passing through her. "Be careful with that one," Alice warned, her voice low. "It's not just a van. It's something else. It lures people in, makes them think they're in control, but you're not. None of us are." She took a deep breath. It was used in a ritual, a cult's final act. They used it to transport something. Nina's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean, something?" Alice looked around nervously before leaning closer. "It's not just a van. It's cursed. It feeds on people, on their energy, their lives. And once it has you, it won't let go. It'll make you part of it." Nina's stomach twisted. She glanced at Jordan, but he wasn't paying attention, more focused on his phone. Alice's words lingered in the air like smoke. "Why are you telling us this?" Nina asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alice looked over her shoulder as if she were expecting someone to be watching. "Because I've seen it before. I've seen what it does to people. You have to get rid of it before it's too late." Before Nina could respond, Alice turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The whispers got worse. They came in the form of voices in Nina's dreams, calling her name, urging her to let go, to become one with them. And slowly, she felt herself slipping. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. It was the van, too. It felt like it was alive, like it had a mind of its own, twisting the world around her. She felt more and more disconnected from reality, as if the lines between the waking world and the dreams were starting to blur. And then, one day, Jordan snapped. He had started to notice the way Nina had been changing. The way she seemed distant, as if she wasn't quite there. She was no longer the woman he had known. Her eyes had a strange, vacant look, and she would often talk to the van as though it were a person, responding to it as though it had feelings. "Nina, this has to stop," Jordan yelled one night as they sat in the van parked in the middle of the desert. "This van, this thing, is messing with you. We need to leave now." But Nina didn't listen. She could hear the van whispering to her, telling her to stay, to be a part of something greater. The voices in her head were louder now, more insistent. The van had claimed her, and she was no longer fully herself. That was when Jordan knew. He had lost her, and it was too late for him too. The van started moving on its own, its engine roaring, to life as if it had been waiting for this moment. It drove itself, slowly, down the empty road toward the horizon, toward the endless desert. Jordan screamed, his voice breaking, but Nina didn't answer. She sat in the passenger seat, her eyes blank, her lips moving as if she were speaking to someone invisible. "Stop the van," Jordan shouted, panic clawing at his throat. "Nina, please." But Nina didn't respond. She was lost, consumed by the van and the whispers that had taken over her mind. She didn't even notice as the road narrowed, leading them toward the edge of the world. And then, as the van drove itself into the vast emptiness of the desert, the whispers stopped. The air was still. There was no sound. Nothing but the endless, dark stretch of sand. Jordan screamed one last time, but it was swallowed by the silence. The van kept moving, its wheels kicking up dust as it drove on with Nina inside, lost forever. Story number 10. Dax Everett was used to the hustle. As an ambitious content creator, he knew the power of a viral moment. It didn't matter how strange, how bizarre, if it grabbed attention, it was worth it. That's why he'd chosen the Pacific Northwest's infamous Cascade Trail for his latest live streaming project. It was a place surrounded by mystery, a place where people had vanished, never to return. The online forums were full of stories. Hikers who'd disappeared without a trace, their names swallowed up by the forest, their families left with nothing but the occasional cryptic clue. The locals whispered about strange noises, shifting trees, and a force in the woods that twisted the very fabric of reality. Dax wasn't sure what to believe, but he knew one thing. This was content gold. "I still don't think this is a good idea," Leah said, looking nervously at the dense trees ahead of them. She was the sensitive one, the one who felt things others didn't. She had a deep connection to the supernatural, or at least that's how Dax saw it. She was good for the drama, the psychic medium, who could sense all the creepy things in the dark. "Leah, stop overthinking. We're just here to film, get some creepy footage and head out," Dax said, adjusting the camera on his gear. His audience would eat this up. Ghosts, disappearances, the unknown. It was all the perfect recipe for viral success. Mike, the cameraman, gave a grunt of agreement. I'm with Dax. Let's get this over with and get back to the car before dark. Erin, the fourth member of their group, didn't say much. She was quiet, always kind of distant. Dax had brought her along because she had a good sense for the technical side of things. Sound, equipment, and all that. But lately, she'd been acting strangely. She seemed distracted, and there was something cold about her lately, something that Dax couldn't quite put his finger on. The group set off down the trail, with Dax streaming live to an eager audience. The trees stretched high above them, blocking out much of the sunlight. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth. The forest seemed too quiet, too still, even though they were in the middle of one of the most popular hiking areas in the state. There was a sense of isolation that Dax couldn't shake. Leah kept glancing nervously behind them, as if she could feel something watching them. It's not safe here, she muttered under her breath. The forest doesn't want us here. Stop it, Leah, Mike said, rolling his eyes. It's just an old trail. Nothing more. But Dax couldn't ignore the unease that began to gnaw at him. As they walked deeper into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The trees didn't seem like trees anymore. They were watching them, bending at odd angles, their gnarled roots twisting unnaturally underfoot. I don't like this, Mike said, looking around. It's changing. Do you see that? Dax focused the camera on the trees, trying to keep his cool. The footage would be epic. Yeah, I'm getting it. Keep it rolling, Mike. But the deeper they went, the more the forest seemed to shift. The trees no longer just loomed around them. They started moving. The trunks twisted in places they shouldn't have. The path, behind them, once clear and well marked, was now fading away, as though the forest itself was reclaiming it. The way back was becoming less distinct, lost in shadows. Leah stopped in her tracks. This place, it's alive, Dax. You have to. Stop filming and leave. It's feeding on us. Leah, relax, Dax said, though he felt a knot tightening in his chest. The path's just changing. It's probably an illusion or something. We'll be fine. Just stay focused. But Leah was shaking her head. No, you don't understand. This forest, this thing, it's feeding on our fear. It lives. Dax laughed nervously. Leah, you're freaking out. You're not helping. Just focus on the content. We're here to get views. Leah stepped back, eyes wide. Dax, listen to me. This is what happened to all the others, the ones who disappeared. Stop with the drama, Erin said suddenly, speaking up. She had been quiet, but now there was something sharp in her voice. We're not going anywhere until we get this footage. People are waiting for it. But as the hours passed, the air grew heavier. Every step seemed to drag. Dax's live feed started glitching, the connection wavering. The trees were no longer just trees. They were closing in on them, the path twisting in ways that made no sense. Leah's warnings were starting to feel too real. The forest was changing, but now it was becoming something else. Something alive. The deeper they went, the harder it became to find their way back. The sunlight was nearly gone, and the thick canopy above them let no light through. Dax's camera kept capturing strange shapes flickering between the trees. Dark, shadowy figures that shouldn't have been there. The whispers began then, faint at first, just beyond hearing. But they were there. Names. The trees whispered names. Names of people who had walked this path before and never returned. Leah, Dax called out, his voice trembling. Do you hear that? What is that? Leah's face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. It's them, the ones who died here. They're still here. They're trying to pull us in." "We need to go back," Mike said, his voice cracking. "We've been here too long. Something's not right." But when they turned around, the path behind them was gone. The trees had completely rearranged themselves, blocking their way. The world around them was no longer the same. It was as if the forest had turned into a maze, each turn leading them deeper into its belly. Erin stood a little apart from the group, her expression unreadable. "It's already too late. We're all part of the forest now." "What do you mean?" Dax asked, his heart pounding in his chest. Erin didn't answer. Instead, she pulled out a strange, twisted knife, a blade that gleamed faintly in the darkness. "That's enough," Leah whispered. "You were working with it all along." Erin's lips twisted into a smile that wasn't quite hers anymore. "You didn't think it was just the forest, did you?" She raised the knife. "I'm the one who brought you here. You're not leaving. None of you are." In that moment, the truth hit Dax like a slap. Erin had led them here. She had been in league with the forest the whole time, using their fear to trap them. And now, the forest had them. The last thing Dax saw was Erin's face, distorted with something dark, something wrong. Then, the world went black. The camera was found days later, alone on the trail. The footage was intact, but the screen was static. Only the sound of rustling leaves and faint whispers could be heard. And in the distance, the trees, those twisted, gnarled things, were still moving. As the camera rolled, the whispers grew louder, clearer. They were names, names of the vanished. And then one last name was whispered. Dax. The forest closed in. Want to know who survives and who doesn't in this chilling story? Hit subscribe and click the bell for more spine-tingling, edge-of-your-seat content. Leave a comment below with your theories on what happens next, and don't forget to like and share this with friends who love a good horror mystery. Stay tuned, because when the forest watches, there's no escape.